简单甲你介绍 Dr. Tsai 是做伙朋友。我用英文讲，因为我有时会晓讲，唔敢会讲伊的迄个履历表哈。Dr. Ho Chie Tsai is a board-certified urgent care pediatrician and hospitalist working around the San Francisco Bay Area. He's on staff as an attending physician at the UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital of Oakland. Additionally, Dr. Ho Chie Tsai holds a bachelor degree in electrical engineering from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and a master's degree of bioengineering from University of Illinois in Chicago, ICU. During the 1990s, Dr. Tsai was actively involved with various Pan-Asian organizations at UIUC and throughout Chicago. In Taiwanese American community, Dr. Tsai is known for his extensive commitment and work among the second generation. In 1991, he was one of the original 15 founding seeds who met at Taiwanese American Conference, East Coast, and returned to their home campus to help create an intercollegiate students network, which later grew into the well-known Intercollegiate Taiwanese American Student Association, ITASA. In his postgraduate years, he was a long-time program director for the grade school program at the Taiwanese American Foundation Summer Conference and many other youth summer camps around the country. Since 1996, Dr. Tsai also served as a Taiwanese American Foundation board member. He was also the founder and now advisor for the Taiwanese American Professional in San Francisco, TAP-SF. I'm sure Alex Wu can relate to that, right? Okay. Today, Dr. Tsai remains proactively involved in various Asian American community grassroots and leadership development organizations, especially within the Taiwanese American community. He is most recognized as the founder of TaiwaneseAmerican.org, a national web portal site and a 501 nonprofit organization dedicated to connecting and highlighting the new generation Taiwanese American. So it's a tax-deductible group. If you would like to make a contribution, please write a check to TaiwaneseAmerican.org and give it to Dr. Tsai at the end. We're all going to appreciate your contribution to help out next generation, third generation, fourth generation Taiwanese American grow. In 2012, Dr. Tsai was recognized with an Outstanding Asian American Alumni Award from his alma mater, thus joining an esteemed circle of past recipients, including Academy Award winner An Li, Li An 也是其中一个, late author, journalist Iris Chang, award-winning spoken word poet Kelly Chie Tsai, and others. Dr. Tsai is popular workshop and keynote speaker at Taiwanese and Pacific Asian American conferences across the nation and enjoys being surrounded by youthful people with a vision of future. Please give a round of applause to Dr. Ho Chie Tsai.
Hi everybody. Sorry, we're having a little technical difficulty, but I will get through no matter what. Again, my name is Ho Chie Tsai. Thank you so much for inviting me, for having me today. It is always a pleasure for me to join you, the first generation, and our second generation at these community events. Pam asked me to speak, and I was happy to come and join you guys. And for the longest time, I wasn't sure what I would speak about. I think many of you have seen me. I was thinking about what I was speaking about today, and really I wanted to pick a theme that would cover a bunch of different topics and combine it into one short speech, but also as an intro for my co-keynote speaker after me. And so I chose the theme, the stories of our lives, because I wanted to really acknowledge the stories of your lives, the things you have done for our community, the struggles that you've been through. I know you see me as a young second generation, but actually I'm not so young anymore, and I look to our younger generation to be doing some of the great work that they're doing in the community. In fact, I don't know if you guys know, but I'm actually probably middle-aged now, and I'm probably older than most of you when you first came to this country. I no longer count as this young generation. Thank you. So the stories of our lives. Recently, I've been thinking a lot more about my family. My parents are getting older. You know, health is always a concern, and we've had more time spent together listening to each other, talking about our stories, our lives, what they've been through. And I've come to this point in my life where I wish I could have learned more. I wish I could have listened more. I wish I, as a younger child, maybe could have accepted my identity earlier, and maybe I would have had a more fulfilling experience understanding what they've been through, what you guys have been through. One of my friends recently, an author named Michelle Kuo, recently published a book called Reading with Patrick. But we connected recently, and one of the things she recently said to me really stuck with me. And what she said to me was this quote, I paraphrase: "Some of the most meaningful stories, relationships, and life lessons come from the acknowledgments of our vulnerabilities, our fears, and our struggles." And you know, I've spent a lot of time in my life, the past 20 years, like speaking to youth really in a more encouraging way, but I've hardly ever revealed my own personal struggles. So today I'm going to do something different. I'm going to talk a little bit about my own life, slightly, and to tell you some of the things that I've struggled through. And I think it'll help you understand your own kids and our third generation coming along, and maybe help you figure out how we can get our current second generation more involved in the community. So there's also a phrase that some of you might have heard. It's called, this phrase is called, "That's the story of my life." Who's heard that phrase used in that particular way? Oh, that's the story of my life. Like today, you've spent so much time prepping for a presentation and then suddenly technical difficulties happen. Oh, that's the story of my life. Have you heard this phrase before? Yeah. So, you know, I want to take a turn on this phrase of the stories of our lives to, oh, that's the story of my life, and tell you a little bit about some of my stuff, some of the issues I was dealing with when I was growing up. So when I was young, I was very uncomfortable being Asian. You know, I grew up in the Midwest in Chicago, and I was one of the few Asian kids growing up. And I found this old photo of me as a kid, and I had drawn this, a cutout paste of a figure of me. And I look back now and I say, wow, I actually picked out the color yellow, because I realized I was this yellow kid that didn't fit amongst the very white mainstream suburbs of Chicago. And back then I didn't have the words, I didn't know what that meant, but looking back I realized how I didn't fit in and how I was recognized, the color of my skin, and how different I was. You know, as a young kid I tried so hard to fit in. I remember this phrase I kept on saying when I was young, and these things are just kind of coming back to me in my life now. And one of the things I would say to myself was, I wish I could be like Mike. I wish I could be like Mike. And what that meant to me was that there were so many Michaels in my class, and they were the blonde kids, the blue eyes, they were the white kids who just seemed popular and had it all together. All the other kids liked them. I was this Asian kid that just didn't fit in. And so, even as I tried and things seemed to fall in place sometimes, there would be always those little times and incidents where people would point out, oh, you know what? Oh, you're so different. Where are you from? Oh, look, I found your name on a globe, Ho Chi Minh City. Are you Vietnamese? And those little moments, you know, you brush off when you're a kid, but looking back, I realized, oh, that's the story of my life, just never being able to fit in. You carry this all through your life, and there are times when, even as I was growing up, you know, going to college, you know, I became more of an activist leader, and I started trying to do more things in the community. You know, you think you have it all together. You think, oh, okay, I can reclaim my identity. I know who I am. And then it only takes one person to say, hey, you chink, why don't you go back to where you came from? And suddenly your world falls apart again. That's how vulnerable we sometimes are growing up. And I've definitely felt that. And I think there's some times in our lives when you realize you have to start to control who you are. And if anything, I want you to walk away with is that I think a lot of our kids go through this. They may look fine on the outside. They do well in school. You push them hard. They do okay. They play their instruments. They get decent grades. They can do better. A- is not good enough, or is that A+, you know? But I think they struggle. And I think parts of it are not just the academic and professional. A lot of it is internal. Who am I? We always ask those questions. Who am I? What am I going to do with my life? How will I actually make an impact? Will I be someone of importance in the future? And to be honest, I think as I've gotten older, I realized that we actually go through all of these questions in various stages of our lives. Even probably as an older adult, you probably have some form of this question in your mind. You know, and I think the main issue is it all comes down to identity. Who am I and how am I comfortable with myself? Will I accept myself? Will I love myself? I didn't have that for myself when I was young. I didn't have those role models or the storytellers or the folks who I could look up to and say, you know what? Those are good examples I can aspire to. We lacked that at the time I was growing up. There comes a time in your life when you actually have to turn it around. You have to say, you know what, no matter what people think of me, I need to reclaim my life. I need to be who I want to be. What's that big question? What am I going to do? Well, you know what, I'm going to be the hero of my own story. I'm going to be the one that really says, I don't care what people think. I want to do what I love to do. I'm going to do the things I care about. If it's, you know, fighting for political issues of Taiwan, or if it's figuring out my personal life paths professionally, what am I going to do? I want to kind of go off on a little side story here. Many of you know I'm a doctor, but how many of you know I'm actually also an engineer? I actually have a bachelor's and master's in engineering, right? Let me tell you this story. I spent a lot of my younger years in, doing well in school, but I never listened to myself. I never listened to what I was really interested in. But I did well in math. I did well in science. And when it came one day to applying to college, I asked my mom, what should I major in? I don't even know, because I didn't have to think about it. Everything was pre-programmed for me, and I did fine up to that point. And then she said, well, you're good at math. Why don't you become an engineer? Just don't be a doctor like your dad, because he has a hard lifestyle. And so I checked off the box, electrical engineering, University of Illinois, and I got accepted, and I didn't have to think about it anymore until I graduated. And then when I graduated, I realized, what the heck am I doing? I don't love this stuff at all. And no disrespect to a lot of the engineers in here, living here in Silicon Valley, but it wasn't for me. I did fine, but I didn't have the passion for it. So it took many more years to realize that I really enjoyed doing the other things in my life, working with the young people, working with the youth, with our Taiwanese American community, with the broader Asian American community. And at some point, I started realizing I had to switch my path towards something that allowed me to work with youth. And you saw that picture of that of me and the superheroes and the kids, and that's what I think of myself now. I love working with kids because I want to help them achieve their dreams of becoming their own superhero of their own story. It took me a while to get there. This picture here that shows some of the summer camps in the Taiwanese American community. This is from the East Coast back in the 1990s. I got together with other youth. I started to discover a sense of community. I started working with some of the other young people of my generation to create some of the first networks of the intercollegiate Taiwanese American students. We went on to our own universities and created our own students clubs as well. Here is a picture of me at the University of Illinois with my Taiwanese American Students Club members. We were the first Taiwanese American Students Clubs that existed. And at some point, you have to say, you know what, we have this community. We have to start to teach ourselves lessons. We have to claim our stories and let others know our history. It's not in the history books we were ever taught. It's not even in Asian American studies. So we actually have to tell those stories. And so that last slide was me doing a workshop for other fellow Taiwanese American students. Here is a turning point in my life where I started to say, what else do I love? I love working with kids. And so many people who remember my work in the 90s, for a full decade I used to run youth summer camps in the Midwest and on the East Coast. And I did that for so long, and that's what really inspires me to continue to do the work today. As my kids grow up, even many of them who were my earliest summer camp kids in the top picture, some of them became the current leaders of this generation. And this particular picture is from the Midwest summer camp areas. So I'm really proud of where that community has gone. Today, I think of my work as a little bit broader. You know, I love being able to do all the grassroots, hands-on work with the young people, but I see my work today as something bigger and broader. And many of you know I created this website called TaiwaneseAmerican.org, and it's really to highlight the events, the organizations, the interesting people in our community, especially our second generation community. You know, with the website and our social media group on Facebook, we are probably the largest Taiwanese American Facebook group. We have over 16,000 followers now. 3 years ago, I could say I had 8,000, I thought that was a lot, but 16,000 this year, and we're still growing. So there's a lot of our community out there who's still discovering us, connecting with us, and feeling part of this pride. I want them all to say, I love Taiwan, I love the heritage, I love our parents and where they came from, and I love their stories. I want them to have that feeling of, I Taiwan. And I want them to also say, I am proud to be Taiwanese American. So that's the work I'm doing today, and thank you. And the good news is, a few years ago we registered as a nonprofit organization, and just this past year I started reaching out privately to some of the community members here to help me fundraise so we can support bigger and better projects. And I want to thank you personally, those of you who have donated to our efforts, because we've been able to do some great things. I'm going to transition to this next part of my talk because I want to have you know a little bit more about specifically some of the storytellers in our community. I want you all to know a little bit more about, in the past 5 years, who I've come across in the community who've done some really amazing things telling our stories. And this first slide, you'll recognize Shauna Yang Ryan. Do you guys all remember her from a couple years ago? She spoke at this very event when her book, Green Island, came out. So the next few slides I'm going to show you actually are a bunch of other folks who you may or may not know, but collectively, you'll probably be amazed by what they've accomplished. You know, Shauna Yang Ryan, her novel, Green Island, actually took us from 228, the opening scenes of the book, into the martial law era, into the multiple generations and the issues that they've dealt with as they immigrated to Taiwan. It's done very well, but there are other authors. The next slide shows you some of those that you may have heard of. Julie Wu, a few years ago, published The Third Son, and she really took this story of Taiwan and focused on the Japanese colonization period to the arrival of the KMT and some of the martial law injustices. So her setting is that. On your left, Julia Lin, who is actually Taiwanese Canadian, wrote this novel called Mia that focuses on the Taiwanese Canadian immigrant story, but it very much parallels our experiences because it really discusses the effects of martial law and this immigrant community's experiences in Canada. And then also there are other authors like Jennifer Chow, who actually directly addresses the effects and the legacy of 228. But there's more writers who've not just focused on our historical story, but they're taking their own interests and their own passions and able to make an influence focusing on a broader Taiwanese American story. So, for example, critically acclaimed author Tao Lin a few years ago wrote this novel called Taipei, and his novel actually focuses on the Taiwanese American experience of someone who's living in Manhattan, New York. And so that's another way that someone else has decided they want to share their story. A few years ago, I had another friend who, Mary Jane Huang, who at the time I met her, her name was Mary Jane Nguyen, the Vietnamese name Nguyen. Her story is actually interesting because on the deathbed of her mother, she went up into the attic and found this note, this document that actually said that she was actually adopted from Taiwan and not Vietnam, as her parents for some reason had told her. And so what began as an amazing discovery as an older adult, she wrote this memoir about her pursuit for identity and trying to understand why her Taiwanese heritage was hidden from her, her search for her living parents and siblings, and her story of reuniting with them. But what this tells me is that even as adults, our struggle for identity is strong. You know, we want to know who we are, where we come from, and those stories are impactful and powerful as well. There are other writers, more on the pop culture scene, and some of you may even have heard of them. Eddie Huang was a little bit more on the controversial side, but you all probably have heard of his book Fresh Off the Boat, which was made into the TV sitcom of a Taiwanese American family. Whether it represents us correctly or not, I think it's important because what it does is it gives a broader audience, a mainstream audience, awareness of some place called Taiwan and an Asian American family, specifically in his version, a Taiwanese American family dealing with their issues at a time when he was growing up as an only Asian in Florida in his schools. We have friends like Janet Shea, some of you also know. She's Taiwanese American who's pursued her life and career as a actress, model, and TV show host for the Travel and Living show in Taiwan, Fun Taiwan. There's others who have made their impact writing about food. Kathy Erway is half Taiwanese, but she is very Taiwanese culturally. She goes back, she can speak the language, and in her cookbook doesn't do it justice. Her book of recipes, she tells the stories of our of the roots of the Taiwanese heritage, which makes all of this so unique. And you can get this in any bookstore. Okay, so there are Taiwanese Americans who are making an impact in other ways. Food culture is one of our favorite. Perhaps you like mysteries or sci-fi books. Well, other authors like Ed Lin, for example, in his more recent book, The Ghost Month, he actually addresses the cultural ghost months, places mystery characters and this detective story within the setting of Taipei. There's Wesley Chu, who's actually a up-and-rising, critically acclaimed author as well. His series, the Tao series, in this particular one, Deaths of Tao, he sets his book in both Kaohsiung and Taipei. And I'm pretty sure his dad went to medical school with my dad at Kaohsiung Medical School. So, and then there's Cindy Pon, who you can't see, but she wrote a sci-fi book that's set in a dystopian future of Taipei as well. So there are Taiwanese Americans who want to tell their story their way. One of my personal friends, Charles Yu, maybe you've heard of him, or maybe you know his family, they're very active in the LA area. He is also a critically acclaimed author who is now a writer. He wrote a few books, but one of them, How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe, tells the story of his Taiwanese American experience, but specifically about the relationships with his father. And it's interesting because we grew up together and he seemed very comfortable with on the outside and being successful as a lawyer, but his passions were being a writer and wanting to tell the stories that we deal with. He and his brother, Kelvin Yu, are pretty much very well known on the Asian American entertainment scene because of their next stage of life. So Charles Yu actually quit his law job, and he's now a writer for an HBO hit show called Westworld. Kelvin Yu just recently won Emmy Awards for, his brother won an Emmy Award for his work on Bob's Burgers. Some of the young people also know him as a suave suave Taiwanese American guy on the TV show Master of None. So we are going to new places. In this particular scene up here, you can't really see, but maybe on your other slide, on the other screens there, they were actually gathered at the first Taiwanese American Film Festival in LA, sponsored by TAP chapters in LA. And what the little side story I want to tell you there is, I was surprised when we held the call for submissions that there were over 70 submissions. So that tells me there's like 70 other Taiwanese American writers who want to tell their stories in different formats, and this time it's film. And then the last few slides, you can't see her face, but Jenny Yang, she's a comedian. She likes to tell her stories about the Taiwanese American, Asian American experience, but she's also considers herself herself like a political activist as well. So she's making an impact on YouTube and other media. Another comedian named Sheng Wang, who labels himself as the Taiwanese Texan. He recently was hired on as a writer for the TV show Fresh Off the Boat. And when you do that, when you become influential, when you're able to tell your stories and claim your place in the professional world, doing the things you love, you can do things like ask your friends to be on the TV show. And you can't, I don't know if you can tell, but in the middle, that's Jeremy Lin. So we asked Jeremy Lin to come and star on an episode of Fresh Off the Boat, some other comedian friends, and Sheng Wei himself is the character on the right. So, I think it's really interesting to see how all of us, in our various ways, are able to contribute to telling our stories in our own different ways. I choose mine through the website and through my speaking opportunities and work with youth. My other friends do it by sharing their stories or making the influential writing choices that show up on our screens. I started off this talk with a little quote about our vulnerabilities, our fears, our struggles, and this is Michelle Kuo, who made me think about that recently. She came out with this book called Reading with Patrick. Her story is interesting because this novel just came out this past summer, but she never discovered the Taiwanese American community until just last year. She grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where she didn't have much contact with Taiwanese Americans. She never thought about it. But in her book, she discusses her Taiwanese American experience and her family's experiences in great detail. She took her experiences, she held off law school so she could go and work in the deep South with poor African American communities, reading with teaching first. But the drama in the story is that one of her favorite students, Patrick, committed a murder and ended up in jail. And she put her entire life on hold. She said, law school can wait. I'm going to go back and spend time with my favorite student and help him through this experience. And she spent time reading with him, writing with him, having him improve his ways of telling his stories to his own daughter while he was in jail. And through this parallel, she actually, I don't know, you have to read it for yourself, but she tells that her motivation is driven from her parents, who weren't very vocal about being Taiwanese American. Maybe it's the effect of being in the Midwest, but she realized that it was the martial law experience that made her realize that this is the work that she had to do to help people who could not help themselves to overcome some of the struggles. And she found all these parallels and she writes about it in her book. So I'm really proud of that there are Taiwanese Americans still coming out of the woodwork and helping us move the story forward. This last week, one of my other friends, Stephanie Chen, just published a book, Travails of a Trailing Spouse. And she is a second-generation Taiwanese American with third-generation kids who's now moved to Singapore. So now our stories are becoming wider and more diverse because now we're talking about Taiwanese Americans moving to other parts globally to be able to tell their stories about love, life, children, family, the things that you guys have really ingrained in us. And she's a published author as well. Even in our grassroots community, we're doing our own projects. I think it's next week, we're going to, we're going to probably announce the publication, it's pretty much done, of our first Taiwanese American mini anthology. One of my team members on TaiwaneseAmerican.org called out for submissions from the young people in the community to tell their stories, and we got over 60 submissions from 30 authors that I had not even heard of. And so I'm so proud that many people are out there. So you'll see this project soon. The stories of our lives, I want you to just realize these are our collective stories, all of our stories, all of our generations. And that's one way that we are going to move our generations and our stories and our identity forward. Whether you're on the East Coast, the Midwest, the West Coast, there's young people just waiting and hungry for these stories. And I'm so proud that many of our second generation are starting to tell theirs. And I'm so proud that we can appreciate your stories because collectively this is our Taiwanese American story. That really concludes my portion, but I want to show you my next slide because one final book is a book of poetry called The Book of Chord.